And welcome back to another episode of Casey, a special edition of Casey Campbell's Videocast. And of course, I'm joined by the MHSA Executive Director, Mark Uyl. I asked Mark to come on because there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of things going on with the governor's announcement last week calling for the MHSAA to move some sports to possibly the spring. So I asked Mark to come on and talk about a lot of that. Mark, thanks so much for coming on, man.
You bet.
So let's get into it. Of course, the governor announced that she's calling on you guys to move sports that have a lot of contact, which a lot of people assume that would be football, soccer, volleyball. I'm not sure where that kind of stands, but where does that stand, and how are you guys kind of reacting to it?
So we've got three priorities, and they've been our three major priorities now for going on several weeks. The first one is that our current plan is to play our normal slate of fall sports in the fall. So that's number one. So all of our current planning that's going on, it is to play fall sports in the fall. Our second big priority is, even if it looks a little bit different or we have to get creative at times during the year, is we want to have 3 seasons of sports this year. That the experience of our seniors last year, losing out on the entire spring season, is something that we never want to have happen again. And priority number 2 is that we have 3 seasons during the year. And then the third one, even though our plan is fall goes in the fall, you've got to have contingencies, not just, and by the way, the governor didn't announce that. She was asked a question about athletics, and in her answer, she basically suggested that is something that should be considered, that maybe switching around sports. Now, the problem with that certainly is everybody wants to gravitate to football. So certainly, given the contact nature of football, there certainly are some concerns with football. For me, I've got just as many concerns, Casey, about the 2 indoor fall sports that we play, which are volleyball and girls swimming and diving. Because everything you read right now is there are far fewer concerns with outdoor activities, whatever they may look like, versus indoors. I mean, heck, our gyms and fitness centers aren't even open yet in our state. There's some issues with fall sports. All of our spring sports are scheduled. Those all happen outdoors. It's by far the smallest group of crowds and spectators of all 3, but we're just not in a position yet to even really say that we're going to be switching anything. Again, the plan is the fall in the fall. What other levels do over the next couple of weeks are going to be very helpful to us, Casey. What's the Big Ten and the MAC going to do? What are all the Division II and III schools in our state going to do? Because if they're all going to move forward and play football this fall, well, then it really doesn't make sense for the high schools to be the only group that would move their football season. So certainly what's going on at other levels is going to be part of our metrics. And really, we're just going to kind of see how all of this plays out over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, kind of looking into the main concern from everybody I've talked to is, moving sports to the spring. And it's not like individual sports, because that would mean another trip to the courts. Kind of explain why individual sports can't move.
Well, there's a lot of reasons, both practical reasons. And if you start moving some individual sports but not others, you're going to be fixing one problem, which potentially could be the pandemic. And then if you're going to start to move individual sports around, you're now going to be creating new conflicts for kids. So let's say that a young person plays 2 sports. Well, you play all the individual sports this fall. Well, let's say that a young person was both a golfer and a tennis player. So we're going to play all of the individual sports in the fall. Well, now the only 2 sports that I play, I suddenly have to pick one. So if we would look at any kind of a switch or a swap, like I said earlier, we're going to look at what the colleges are doing. We're also going to look at what the surrounding high school associations are doing, because if we would even swap or change a season, we have a lot of our UP schools that play Wisconsin schools. We have a lot of schools near our southern border that will go into Ohio and Indiana to play some games. And so if, only one state's going to switch seasons, but the other ones are going to remain where they're at, that just creates a whole slew of issues as well. And so we are continuing to communicate with the governor's office. I think she now understands what some of the real concerns are to a potential switch or a swap, and that's why our plan A, without question, is fall in the fall. But as the virus has taught us the last 4 months, Casey, you've got to have some plan Bs and Cs ready to go as the conditions can change awfully quickly.
Now, one thing that I did, excuse me, I did watch the governor's press conference, and there was another thing that kind of interests me is the issue of spectators. She did say that limited spectators would be allowed with masks and social distancing required. What would that look like, and who would that be? Who would be allowed in? Would that be just parents? Would that be students, or would that be parents, students, and the general public?
That'd be a really good question. You'll first need to operate based on what the limitation is. Right now, I think in her document, she suggests 250. Right now in 2 regions of our state, Casey, outdoor events, concerts and those things this summer, that limitation right now is 500. So whatever you're going to do, you've got to take the number of your limitation and then divide that by the schools participating. So if it's a football game and if the limit is, let's say it's 500, then each school would determine how they're going to let their 250 people in. We certainly hope we can get to a point to where we could allow the general public in. And again, if you have to social distance and do some of those things, we have an awful lot of our games where that can be done. Certainly once you look toward the winter, during basketball season, social distancing of spectators gets more and more tricky. So we're really trying to kind of tackle the fall sports and what that would look like. But it would be up to the school, Casey. And certainly I think you would start with parents and family first. And then to fill up the remainder of the group, you'd begin to expand that group a little bit larger.
A question that hasn't really been coming up there, and I know you and I have talked about this, but how will media coverage of high school events look like? Because I know there's a lot of newspapers and radio stations and TV stations, especially in the Lansing area, the Flint area, the Grand Rapids area. What could that look like?
That's actually one thing, Casey, that could be better because of the limits. Because if the general public isn't going to be able to show up to events, I think having media there to cover what happens and to be able to tell that story is going to be more important than ever. We're also looking at how we're going to handle streaming, how we could even handle television, because, if crowds are going to be limited, we then need to probably be creative in terms of allowing more and more of our games to be seen by folks at home, whether that, is done on a streaming type service or even allowing some television during the year. So the pandemic is creating some challenges, certainly for the media that cover our events. But, the thing we've really fought over the last decade is what media outlets are spending to cover high school sports. That has continued to shrink year after year. And possibly, the pandemic, maybe that shift could switch a little bit to where there would be more media coverage than the way things have been trending.
Yeah, I think the concern, talk about some of the schools that have been already, working out. I know they have not been able to go inside except for the 2 regions that you mentioned. When would those regions kind of be able to get like inside weight rooms and all that? With, as many people know, cases have kind of maybe gone up a little bit, but they've kind of stabilized here. When do you think that schools could possibly get back inside and do workouts?
We hope it's soon. I come into the office every day, and the first thing I do is I check Governor Whitmer's daily schedule to see if she's scheduled to do a press conference, which is usually aligned with her release of an updated executive order. As we know, the issue with indoor facilities, fitness centers, weight rooms, workout facilities, has made its way right now through the court system. And currently the appellate court supported Governor Whitmer and in her executive order that is keeping these indoor facilities closed. So as you said, hopefully the numbers can begin to head in a better direction again. I do know that the number of daily deaths that we're seeing, we actually had 0 over the one day this weekend, which was a very positive step. Everything in early June was headed in the right direction, Casey, and unfortunately, we've kind of seen a little bit of a spike, certainly around the country and in Michigan to a certain degree. I think all of us were hoping to be moved to phase 5 in the governor's plan by the 4th of July, and that didn't happen. So we're hopeful here in the next week or two that the numbers and the data can lead her down that path again, and she can begin to open those facilities up. But nope, that's something that we're hopeful for and checking on each and every day.
Kind of going back to the spring, if spring sports were to move, there could be a lot of athletes may have to make some tough choices, or as we've seen, some could possibly move to other states and play if Michigan decided to move fall sports, particularly football and others, to the spring. What would it take for that to happen?
I think you'd really have to see what other organizations and what other states are doing as well. You talk to other states and well, we're not considering a flop or a switch. Well, I guarantee you, Casey, if in 1 week from today, if the Big Ten announces that they're moving their fall sports to next spring, that they're going to play football next spring, they're going to move volleyball to next spring, I can guarantee you that the conversation would look a whole lot different. Because certainly the Mid-America Conference would be behind them, potentially what other levels of college football would do. So part of this, I just think in the colleges are going to have to make those decisions first, because they're already starting to bring athletes back on campus during the month of July. In mid to late July, that's when fall athletes are going to be back on campus. And obviously the colleges are going to have their plan in place. And I also think part of our planning, if, fall stays in the fall, and if we would have an interruption, a suspension, or maybe we can't even start in August, then you have to look at later on in your year, okay, now we still want to get in 3 seasons, but now it's going to go winter and then maybe a March through May season, and then a May through July season for your fall and your spring to try and get those 3 seasons in. But again, those are all decisions that we're not going to make right now. But certainly, the switch is one scenario you have to consider. But I think what's even more important is, okay, if we start in the fall and we have a stoppage, what now is going to be your contingency plan to still try and either finish that season later in the year, or to come up with another way to where your athletes in all 3 seasons can have that season that they want so badly here in 2021.
When is that decision going to be made, I think, is the biggest question that I think everyone's having. I think the governor said she's looking for maybe July 20th, July 25th, that time range. Is that what you guys are looking at?
I think that's probably in the ballpark, Casey, because the really hard part in threading this needle is, on one hand, you want to wait as long as you can, because you want to be able to have data and information to where you can get what you think is going to be the most accurate look at what August is going to be like. And so certainly waiting as long as you can is going to help you on that front. Well, the balance on the other side of that is, with athletics, there has to be scheduling and logistics and officials and all of those kinds of things. So it's finding that right sweet spot between waiting as long as you can to get the most accurate picture, but yet you have to make decisions in time to give people lead time to plan and to schedule and to organize. So you take those 2 factors, and it's somewhere between, the middle to the middle-late part of July is really when those calls are going to have to be made. Not just by us. You're going to have to see the pro leagues doing that, certainly the NFL, what the college levels are doing, what other states are doing. And so I think the next 2 to 3 weeks are going to be pretty important for all of us.
There's a lot of coaches, there's a lot of athletes that are concerned, not just football, but a lot of people are concerned if they're going to have a season or not. What is your message to them?
It hasn't changed. It's really just to hang in there. I think what the pandemic has taught us is, and we'd all love, I think, I could give you an answer today. Well, here is what we're going to do in August, but that would be unfair to everybody because we just don't know exactly what August is going to look like. And I know it's frustrating, and I know that, everybody would like the plan, but yet you've also got to be able to have a plan that can work. And as we continue to track the data and get input from our government and health department officials, we need to wait as long as we can to try and get that August picture, but yet still give folks enough time. And the one thing is we're all hanging in there, Casey, that I think we do have right now is there is a tremendous spirit of cooperation, and we will do whatever it takes to make this work, even if it's in kind of a short window of time, not a lot of notice, because of just that shared experience that we've all had the last 4 months. I think for parents, we just want to see our kids play again. And I've got 3 teenaged athletes that still live in my own house. So believe me, that isn't lost on me. And, my middle kid is going to be a high school senior this year coming up. He's a pretty good 3-sport athlete. So certainly, there's a priority in my own house to make sure that we have not just sports, but 3 seasons of sports, so all of our kids get that opportunity to play.
All right. Mark Uyl, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure definitely we'll be talking when the next big headline hits.
Stay tuned. Thanks, Casey.